Legal Issues with Compensation and Making It Work, Module 7. Government legislation has much influence over the compensation decisions we've made throughout the years. In the 1930s, legislation was focused mainly on the working conditions and protecting the employees. In the 1960s, we begin to see equality movements. And today, we see transparency and fair livable wages to be the focal point of legislation. The employer-employee work relationship falls under the umbrella of the Department of Labor. That's broken down into three more manageable divisions. First, we have the wage and hour division, and that, as the name says, deals with legislation that has to do with protecting the employee with the amount of hours they work and the amount of money they are paid. So we have the Fair Labor Standards Act, Davis-Bacon and Walsh-Healey, they both have to do with prevailing wage, and then the Family Medical Leave Act. The OFCCP deals with federal contracts. It's the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Program, and that oversees Executive Order 11246. You can imagine that's a very large office with dealing with federal contracts throughout the country. And then we have our equal opportunity legislation, such as Title VII, ADA, ADEA, PDA, and Equal Pay Act, and that's all overseen by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Under the Wage and Hour Division, we have the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Now, of course, back in 1938, the working conditions were deplorable. We had children working long hours instead of going to school. So this act brought about some changes in the work environment that were much needed. Created child labor laws to protect the children, established the minimum wage that employers had to pay, created the 40-hour work week, and with that, defined overtime rules. And from that, we see that employees are considered either exempt or non-exempt. And many of the issues with the Fair Labor Standards Act are due to misclassification of employees. Classifying employees is often very difficult because it is very confusing at times. Just in the name, exempt or non-exempt, many people mix these up. A good way to remember this is if you are exempt, you are exempt from being paid overtime. So, how do you determine if your employees are exempt or non-exempt? Well, there's a test. So, the first thing is they have to be paid salary. You cannot pay your exempt employees hourly. Then they also must be paid at least $455 per week or $23,000. The next part of the test is they have to pass the test for one of the exemptions. Now, the executive exemption means that is the person running the empire, running the outfit. This is the person who oversees people, who has the ability to fire and hire. And then an administrative exemption, that is not necessarily for your administrative assistants. Remember, the exemptions, whether you are exempt or non-exempt, doesn't have to do with the job title. It has to do with the job role of your organization, and that changes from organization to organization. So therefore, an administrative exemption is someone who has the ability to make judgment calls for major things that will affect the business. Do they have purchasing power? Can they make a decision with a client over the phone? Ordering from Staples is not a major purchasing decision. And sometimes it can get tricky. Professionals, that one's rather clear-cut. This has to be someone who has to have gone through a formal training such as a lawyer, doctor, teacher to be obtain this profession. And then there's also categories for computer employees, outside sales, and highly compensated. These are all very accessible on the Department of Labor website under the Wage and Hour Division, and take a look at that. It's something you should have in your back pocket at all times when you're managing the compensation and overseeing your exempt and non-exempt employees. And of course, that should be on their job description. Another area of classification that is often done incorrectly is the contractor or employee. Now, just like with non-exempt or exempt, the employer doesn't get to choose who is what. They can't say, I don't like to pay overtime, so everyone's going to be exempt. It doesn't work that way. Same thing with the contractor or employee. A lot of small businesses say, you know what, I don't want to pay the payroll taxes, so I'm going to make everyone a contractor. However, that's not how the laws are laid out. So again, just like with exempt or non-exempt, there are some tests that you have to ask yourself. So, is this person my employee, or can I pay them as a 1099 and contractor? Well, how much autonomy do they have on the role that they're playing? Do they have the ability to come and go as they want? Are they using their own equipment? Are they using your equipment? What is the relationship? Are you overseeing everything that they do in their job and directing their job, or are they coming in, assessing what they need to do, doing it, and leaving? And I always like to say, think of a plumber. Now, if you have a business and you have a leak, you're going to call a plumber. They are going to come in, do the plumbing job, give you a bill, and leave. They have autonomy in their job. They have the control. They're using their own equipment. The relationship is a business contract. They are a contractor. Now, on the other hand, say you own an apartment complex, and you have a plumber, and this plumber is there every day, and they are doing plumbing for you throughout your building every day, and maybe they do some other things. And they come in, they punch a clock, they do their job, and they punch their clock at the end of the day and they go home. That person more or less sounds like they are your employee. So it's something you have to really take a look at. This does get misclassified often, and this is something that can really affect your compensation. The prevailing wage was brought about by the 1931 Davis-Bacon Act and then later amended by the Walsh-Healey Act. And the prevailing wage is the government-defined minimum wage that must be paid for work done on government construction. This is to prevent large contractors from bidding down the pay rate for the job, therefore protecting the employees. Federal legislation has also been enacted to ensure fair and equal treatment in the workplace. As society was striving for equality, legislation began this movement in the workplace. So to define discrimination, you can either discriminate on the access to a job or in valuating the job in what you pay different people. Now, disparate treatment is very easy to see. You're treating two different groups unequally, but disparate impact is a little bit different. It's a little harder to see because on the face value, everything is neutral. However, the effect afterward of the employment decision is treating a group or groups differently. And that is outlined most notably in the Griggs versus Duke Power Plant case is a very popular case where there was an employment test. So on the face value, it looked like everyone had to take this employment test to see if they were going to be promoted to the next level. However, it was unfair to many of the African American employees who may not have had as long of schooling as some of the white counterparts, and what they were seeing were none of the African American workers were getting promoted to the next level because everyone had to take the test, but it wasn't testing job-related materials, so therefore the impact of this test was unfair, and this was ruled to be illegal. Here we have a list of our equal opportunity legislation as overseen by the EEOC. These laws were enacted to ensure a fair and equitable workplace. It's very important that you have a strong understanding of all this legislation in order to manage your compensation decisions fairly, equally, and within compliance. Our authors talk about pay discrimination with dissimilar jobs, and they go into a whole process on how to evaluate jobs that are dissimilar to see if there is pay discrimination. And I wanted to bring this up because this just shows how important job evaluations are and job descriptions with essential functions. These documents will play a very pivotal role if you are if you have to defend pay discrimination. So I just wanted to point out that some things that we really talked about before are really important, and as you can see, they circle back, and we see them again and again. So now we're coming down to the end here, and it's time to start to put it all together. So over the last couple weeks, we have worked on building a compensation system that aligns with our business goals. And now it's time to focus on managing the system so that we have a circular motion going on, that we're constantly assessing where our business is going and making sure that our management processes line up with our compensation system goals. We have built our compensation system, and now it's time to manage it. So one of the ways we have to manage that is our labor cost. Of course, our labor costs cannot go above and beyond what our revenue that we're pulling in. So we have to manage the number of hours worked times the cash compensation and benefits that we are paying for these employees. And some of the decisions that we're going to have to make are you going to pay overtime to your employees? Are you going to bring in contingent workforce or temporary workers? Can you introduce part-timers into the equation or contract out some of your work? So some of these things are some really important decisions that you have to make when you're managing your labor cost. As we wrap up this module and this course, I want you to keep in mind our goals that we had set in place. We are using organizational goals to drive our compensation system, and now we have to carefully manage that. And the magic is in the message. Remember, we've talked about communication is key with your employees. If your goals are to drive behavior, you should message that to your employees, not only in your compensation plan, but by sharing and having open communication with your employees about the goals that you have and the compensation plan that you have. I think you'll find that a transparent, open environment is very conducive to achieving goals.